No one disobeyed, except for the part about dropping everything. Some people who could risk it grabbed crates and ran out. Arda dropped the perpetual motion contraption, not because of Blake's orders, but because he just felt that it was better if he left it, and jumped to one side of the crack as it widened. Arda managed to process that it was spreading north and south along a fault line, parallel to the ocean. He also processed that because they were underground during a Richter 10 scale earthquake, the possibility of the place caving in was... Typically, when an earthquake hits, one would drop, cover, and hold. However, it was vastly different when a level 10 earthquake while underground. The goal in that situation would be to get above ground if anyone wanted a chance at survival. The ground jerked violently beneath them, and the tent seemed to be ripped apart as the two sides shifted, one dropping lower than the other. Rocks and debris fell, and several particularly large stones landed on top of the tent, collapsing it and nearly trapping them inside, just as they stumbled out. No words were exchanged as Blake grabbed Arda and they raced toward the exit of the cave, the tent behind them being torn apart by the tectonic plates shifting. Their boots lit up to help with stability, but Blake still stumbled and fell once. Arda pulled him up and yanked him away just as the ceiling cracked and a boulder landed where they had been just moments before. The cave was getting darker and darker by the second, the only light coming from the few fires that were still lit at the entrance, as well as their own boots and those of the people running around them. The bright circle of the outside shook in Arda's vision as he ran, side by side with Imperialists and Northsphere alike, temporarily abandoning their rivalry as they tried to escape to the exit. Everything was shaking and collapsing. The ground was tilting and moving and alive beneath them. It was getting harder to keep moving as more people funneled towards the cave mouth. The shaking of the earth sent them slamming into each other. Miraculously, Blake's hand was still clasped in his own, refusing to let go. It was absolute chaos, and though it should have seemed like it was the opposite of his time and space, it felt eerily similar in a way. He couldn't control where he was going, couldn't stop himself from stumbling and bumping into others moving in one direction, yet it felt like he wasn't moving at all. But the small fact that Blake was still holding on to him, that made the feeling just slightly more bearable. Before Arda knew it, yet it also felt like years of running, they were at the entrance, and before he could stop himself, they were shaken off the ledge and fell down the cliff towards the water. He tried to reach out and activate his wristband, but the cliff kept shaking and staying just out of reach. "Arda!" Blake shouted. "Rope!" Arda didn't need to be told. He was already fumbling with the pouch at his hip, and upon opening it, grabbed the end with a small grappling hook and slammed it against the cliffside. The claws of the hook scraped against a stone before, thankfully, catching on a ledge, and stopped him and Blake 3 meters above the water that was crashing against the cliff. Arda held onto the rope connecting to the grappling hook with one hand and clasped Blake's hand with the other. The cliff shook and dislodged them, but thankfully didn't have long to fall before hitting the icy cold, dark water. The rumbling was even worse with their heads on the water, like hearing a plane up close. Rocks were falling all around them as they sank. Blake went stiff in the cold, and his face, which was half uncovered with his goggles off, was turning blue. His hand loosened around Arda's and let go. Arda hurried and grabbed onto the grappling hook, stuffing it into his own pouch to prevent it from sinking further down. He swam towards Blake, pulling the blonde towards him. He locked his arms around the taller Northsphere and pulled him up toward the surface. As soon as their heads broke into the cold air, an ice drift barreled towards them, threatening to slam them into the cliffside. Arda covered Blake's mouth with one hand and went under again, letting the ice drift crash against the snow. The current sent them hurtling and spitting in the water, and Arda had to twist so he hit the cliff first before he swam up again, letting Blake take in gulps of air, coughing out water. The water in his eyelashes and hair froze immediately. His clothing was starting to grow stiff in the cold as well. Arda hauled the two of them onto the same ice drift that threatened to crush them and crouched there, the cold seeping into his bones, but he was nowhere as bad as Blake, who was utterly soaked and freezing. "Hang on, Blake," Arda muttered as he grabbed his rope again, detaching the grappling hook. He wound it around Blake's chest, under his shoulders, and tied the blonde securely to him. This would at least prevent him from slipping away on the ice. He could barely keep himself from slipping off. Blake was getting dangerously cold, entire body shivering like a leaf in the wind. Arda could only support him so much with his own body warmth, but if he doesn't have a good immediate situation, he would get hypothermia. He couldn't walk on the cliff with another person's weight. His boots weren't strong enough. He would either have to climb or... "Arda!" He turned and saw Karato on the drifter, which seemed to blend in with the countless ice drifts, except that Karato was poking his head out of the round hole on top. He was heading towards them. Arda jumped in through the large open canopy as soon as it was close enough. He untied Blake immediately, but kept hooking him in an awkward position, shuffling further into the drifter, which was definitely bigger on the inside. "Anyone warm here?" "Doubt any of us are any warmer than you," Karato noted, already rushing over with a thermal blanket. "This might help." Arda wrapped it around both of them, keeping Blake close. He took Blake's hair tie out, letting the water drip to the metal floor of the drifter. Blake barely reacted, shivering violently. His tone was hesitant as he said, "Thank you, but I need to go soon. How do I get to the cliff top?" He regretted his words as soon as he said them. Despite what he said, Arda didn't want to go. He didn't want to admit it out loud, but he couldn't deny it to himself. He didn't want to leave Zeta. The reason for which was, well, it was something that was mystery to himself as well. Another North Sphere member gave him a bridge glider as Karato navigated the drifter and picked up two more people, one North Sphere, one Imperialist. The latter seemed incredibly nervous and grumpy at the prospect of being there, but she didn't really have a choice. Karato turned back to Arda, letting someone else man the controls, and, to Arda's immense surprise, gave him a warm hug. "I'm so sorry we can't accompany you to your launch, but good luck. We won't forget you. Your company has brought a breath of fresh air for us all. Thank you." "I should be the one thanking you," Arda insisted, feeling a weird sensation in his chest. "I'll be going now, Colonel. Good luck to you too." Karato smiled as he pulled back and gave him a pat on the head. Arda couldn't even begin to fathom this new feeling. Arda arrived at a cliff top via bridge glider, having gained speed by standing on the top of the drifter, and the air currents carried him up, almost too far. The ground was still shaking, and forced him to fall on one knee to steady himself. Not that it mattered. Nothing much mattered right then. He had been carrying his belongings since they'd set out. Not that he had much, just his clothing and the gifts Blake gave him. Now he would just have to wait. He reckoned he had less than 5 minutes. He could feel his internal countdown, ticking down to 0 slowly but surely, the countdown that had never failed to signal when he would launch. And he hated that. He knew he shouldn't hate it. It wouldn't do a thing to stop what was bound to happen. He hadn't been able to stop it. He hadn't been able to control it. He never would be able to in his entire life. He'd come to accept that a long, long time ago. He never had a grip on where he went, on who he met, on his life, on his fate. He had never been given a choice. It was always made for him. Arda Zifny had long since come to terms with this helplessness in his own meaningless existence. And yet, This time, it was so different. For once, he almost couldn't accept that he had to go. He didn't want to go. For once, he wished he could control the launch. For once, he allowed himself to hate it. He didn't want to leave Zeta. He didn't want to go. He really didn't want to go. The sky was dark now. Snow fell ceaselessly, reflecting the faint lights of the drifter below, the ocean a relentless moving body. The earthquake was coming to a stop slowly, but the aftershocks would still be felt occasionally for a long time. It was nearly pitch black in the forest. Arda breathed out, knelt in the snow. It was fine. He had gone through this 700 times. He would be fine going through it once more. He would survive. He couldn't not, after all. Arda was absolutely silent as the clock ticked down to 0. He closed his eyes, expecting and imagining the feel of the launch. His body getting warmer, lighter, the feeling of energy escaping from his chest, feeling himself suddenly in midair, the gut-wrenching feeling of being weightless after 2 weeks of having sweet gravity, cold air rushing past, stabbing into his exposed skin, tugging on his clothes. Then the feeling of the utter and complete emptiness of space, and then he was still on Zeta? Arda's eyes flew open as he stood, nearly falling again due to his haste and the shaking of the ground. His heart was racing 100 miles per hour. What was going on? He put a hand to his chest. The countdown, the clock, was definitely at 0, and yet he was still here. What was happening? Why wasn't he launching? Why was it only happening now? What in all the stars of the Milky Way made Zeta so different from the other planets? 783 times. 783 times the countdown hadn't failed him once. The launch didn't fail to initiate. His fate would always end up in the same, drifting in the endless darkness of space. His questions about Zeta were already overflowing, but he thought it would inevitably be brushed aside, unanswered when he forcefully moved on. Instead, the pile just grew bigger. Someone was approaching. Arda turned just as he saw Blake, wrapped ridiculously in a thermal blanket while on the bridge glider, like a flying burrito, landed in the snow beside him. His hair was still out of its usual ponytail, unnaturally long. Arda! Oh, thank goodness, I caught you before you did your thing. Why are you a freezing flying burrito with the very real risk of getting hypothermia? Arda demanded, his heart still racing. He stomped towards Blake. He blamed his unusual behavior on his erratic heartbeat. You need warmth. Well, you're warm enough, Blake protested. And is this how you treat your best friend on Zeta just before you leave here forever? Those words seemed to stab Arda in the chest before he remembered that he wasn't launching. I'm not leaving. He was still struggling to understand it when he said it. Hearing it out loud, however, seemed to make it more real. Even in the near non-existent light, Arda could see Blake's eyes widen with surprise behind his goggles. But what? Blake stared at him before walking closer and grabbing Arda's shoulders. Wait, are you sure? I know you don't usually kid being the robot that you are, but after developing a sort of personality... No, I can't explain why I didn't launch. I just didn't. Arda was struggling to keep his breathing in control. I'm not leaving. I don't know why, but I'm staying on Zeta. Arda thought Blake would crack a joke, or grin, or say something stupid. Instead, unexpectedly, he frowned with worry. If that's true, then, Arda, we need to go right now. What? Blake bent down and grabbed both their bridge gliders. His voice was more serious than he had ever heard, coming only second to when he ordered people to evacuate during the earthquake. Arda, when I left, we had set up a temporary joint camp on Jokin Cliff. The Imperialists were trying to force your location out of Colonel Krato. They know about you, and they want to capture you for some reason. No doubt they're probably searching for you right now. We need to go. Where? To Coltis? The base? No, too dangerous. The Imperialists, we don't know what they're going to do. They outnumber us, even though they have more of the injured. We'll just head south. It's the best option. Arda could tell it wasn't something they could spend time going into too much detail about. He grabbed his bridge glider from as Blake started to head down further into the forest. But what about you? You still need medical attention. Blake grinned behind his mask. Arda, like always, could tell. Nah, I'll be fine if I get the almighty Arda Zephny along. Now come on, we have a long way to go before it's safe enough to rest. I'm sorry. The blonde scoffed. Why in the bridge are you sorry? This is my choice, you know. I've weighed the risks and benefits, and honestly, I don't mind going along with you. There was a moment of silence before he said, You would make a good colonel, you know. No, that's a job for Karato. I'm not good enough for that. Arda begged to differ, but he didn't say so out loud. Anyways, Blake slung an arm over Arda's shoulders as they walked into the night. It's time for a little duo adventure in a frozen hell on Zeta.